As we stood at the end of that long aisle, my dad turned to me. Honey, do you have any reservations? If we stop right here, I'll back you 100%. I just need to know for sure. That was so my dad. I loved his tender heart and his concern for me, even though it would have been embarrassing at the end of the aisle on my wedding day to call it off. And yet Dad loved me more than he was concerned about his reputation or mine or looking foolish. I turned to my dad with tears in my eyes and said, "No, Daddy, I know this is right." He grinned at me and he said, "Well, then let's go." And we went down that aisle joyously. That day, my husband and I stood before the minister in that very packed room, and we said our vows, traditional vows that had stood the test of time. You know, as I was saying those vows, I dreamed about our picture-perfect marriage. After all, we had parents who had given us excellent examples, and we both loved Jesus and believed that he would get us through anything. I made those vows wholeheartedly that day, and I'm sure you did too on your wedding day. And I meant every word. Well, at least I thought I did. But when addiction and depression and betrayal threatened our marriage, I came face to face with the meaning behind those time-tested vows. We had hit the worst, in for better or for worse. And during that time, God asked me a couple of questions that rocked my world. The first one was, are you a liar? And the second one, am I, God, big enough to get you through this and heal your marriage? Interestingly enough, at that time, when I was being stubborn and I was hurt and I was angry and I wanted to strike back at my husband, I wanted him to feel the pain that I felt from his pornography addiction. Somehow I wanted him, in my sense of justice, to pay the price, to feel it. But as I look back, what would have been sufficient payment? And that's the trouble when we seek revenge. And this is why God took me through my vows, line by line. From this day forward, you know, on that day, there's a starting point, but there's no ending. There's no caveat of, well, I'll stay married with you as long as I love you, or as long as you make me happy, or as long as things are going great. No, there was no ending point. For better, for worse, you know, our life was filled with wonderful memories that I didn't want to forget. All of the sweet and tender and funny things that my husband did for my kids and in me. Up until this point, it had really been what I thought was a fairly good marriage. For richer or poorer, my husband's a hard worker and he has always provided everything that we've needed. No, we haven't been rich, but we haven't been poor either. In sickness and in health, well, God got me on this one. You see, for most of our marriage, I'd had illness after illness and after illness. My husband got the raw end of this deal. It put a strain on our finances, and it also strained our relationship. Yet through every illness, my husband exhibited patience and loving care for me. Sure, there were times that he was sick, you know, and we all like to joke about how when men are sick, they're babies. But most of the time, Dave had to deal with me being sick, and he had to care for not only me, but our very young children. Forsaking all others. I thought, gotcha. I'm good on this one. And very quietly I heard God say, really? Quietly but firmly, he took me through some of the romance books that I liked to read. Some of those had some sexual titillating thoughts, and it stimulated me, and God reminded me that that kind of stimulation was only reserved for my husband, not for anyone else. So had I kept my mind pure? Not really. In the Bible, it tells us that if you have lust in your heart, in your mind, toward another person, you have committed adultery. So I hadn't kept my mind pure. And so God said to me, really? Is Dave the only one who has violated the marriage vows? And in that moment, my pride and arrogance began to crumble. Until death do us part. As much as I hurt and as much as I felt like I wanted to die, I was still very much alive. And God reminded me that I hadn't kept my vows purely either. And so if I had the right to walk away from my marriage, so did my husband. You see, sin is sin. There's no hierarchy of sin in God's eyes, even though I wanted to elevate the sin of the pornography addiction above my own pride and arrogance and my lying to my husband. So now began the heart work, which is what we all need to do. And as I worked on these things, as I dove deeper into the Psalms and the book of John and Ephesians, and I started to study more about who Jesus is, God asked me another question. Am I who I say I am, or am I not? And how I answered that question was going to impact the next few days, weeks, and months of my life. It would greatly impact my healing in my marriage, personally, my husband's healing, and our marriage healing. Now, there's some lessons that I've learned through the fire of this healing, and I wanted to share these with you and find that these were necessary for me to recover from my husband's pornography addiction and my depression and anxiety. I'm only going to list them here. If you want to read the full explanation of them, I encourage you to hop over to my blog on KirstenDSamuel.com. Kirsten is spelled Kirsten, D as in Diane, Samuel, SAMUEL.com. I don't have time to go through the full explanation of all of these, but I wanted to give them to you. The first lesson I learned was I'm valued. The second is I was forgiven. The third was I was freed. The fourth is overcome. And the fifth one, which probably is the most important one, is that I am loved, unconditionally loved by God the Father. As I studied and as I learned these lessons, which I'm still learning, Dave and I are still working through the recovery, and we're still having to revisit these lessons that God revealed. But through this process, I've learned the answer to the questions that God gave me. One, no, I am not going to stand before him someday and tell him I lied on my wedding day in my vows. I'm going to keep my promise. But secondly, and most importantly, and the only reason that I'm able to keep that promise is because, yes, God is big enough to help me overcome these wounds. I don't know where you are on your healing journey, but if you'd like someone to listen and not judge, if you'd like to receive an outstretched hand to steady you on this uneven journey, I've been where you are, and I'd love to show you how to move forward. You can email me at kirsten@kirstenDSamuel.com. Again, Kirsten is spelled KIRSTEN at KirstenDSamuel.com, or send me a direct message here on Facebook or through my website. I hope that as you read through and remember your vows, that you remember with joy that there's something fun from your wedding day that you can remember like I do. But more importantly, I hope that you will understand that God is big enough to get you through whatever the wound is that you're carrying. Until next time, have a great day.